Well, I feel more Lutheran than I did last year on Reformation Sunday. That could be because I needed more grace during the year than usual. But the reason probably is that I just returned from a pilgrimage to Germany and to Italy with a group of people, clergy and lay people, who are Catholic and Lutheran. And we visited all of the significant sites related to Martin Luther, and of course went to the heart of the Roman Catholic Church in Rome, and also to beautiful Assisi. So, I actually stood looking at that door. It's not the same door, the real door has been burned up in a fire, but I stood at the place where Martin Luther nailed those 95 theses protesting the sale of indulgences, an event that sparked the Reformation and also very significant societal change. And somehow it all became more real to me. But so did the fact that in that bosom of the Reformation, the reality of that proclamation of God's grace is not being quickly or abundantly received or acknowledged. And I'll explain that to you. As I stood there in the Castle Church at a relatively small marker at the grave of Martin Luther, I wondered if he was rolling around in there. You know, the expression causes you to turn over in your grave. Well, I wondered if he was, because we learned that in that area where Martin Luther was born and baptized, where he was ordained and preached the gospel, where he so boldly felt that change was needed in the church, that he spoke out in ways that caused him to be called a heretic. In the midst of that very location, the fact of the matter is that only 15% of the people claim any affiliation with any church or religious group. Only 15%. Of that 15%, 14% are Catholic or Lutheran. The majority are Lutheran. But here's the not so good news about that 15%. In Germany, if you say that you are a church member, you are automatically taxed by the government. There's a church tax. It's automatically taken out of your salary. I don't know if that contributes to the problem or not, but I wouldn't be surprised. And so what that does is it creates a mentality, not of people giving to the church because they support the ministry and they feel that God is leading them to give of their time and their talent and their resources to make ministry happen. It creates this mentality that I have paid for a service. And those services are baptism, confirmation, of course, weddings, marriage, and funerals. And so most people of those tiny 15% or 14% do not attend worship regularly. They just show up for their paid-for service or activity. Now, what that means is that officially 85% of the population in that particular part of Germany, which is a large part of Germany, and it's probably true for much of the rest of the country, but I didn't get the details about that, 85% of the people are not concerned in any tangible or visible way with spiritual matters. And 14 or 15% are probably only tangentially concerned with spiritual matters. I found that to be very sad, very disconcerting. When you think about the powerful, transforming proclamation of Martin Luther, that we are saved by God's grace through faith. A message that continues to transform lives. And realize how few people have any connection to it in the place of that message's birth. It's very sad. And the fact is that most of the churches are museums. Places where very little ministry happens and where very few people attend worship. One of my memories will be being in Eisleben, which is where Martin Luther was both born and died. And we were in the church where he had preached his last sermon. The pulpit is still there. They say it's the very pulpit that he stood in back in the 1500s. And it's interesting because it's not in the front of the church. It's more in the middle of the church among the people. The story is that he had come to Eisleben. He no longer lived there, of course. He lived in Wittenberg. But he had come to Eisleben in order to resolve conflict among some of those who were following what was then called the Lutheran way. And he had spent long nights trying to resolve this conflict. And he also was preaching in this church that was called St. Andrew's. Well, that particular day, it was a November day, I think, he got up to give a sermon. He was preaching, ironically, on Matthew 11, which is the text that says, "Come to me, all you who are weary and heavy laden, and I will give you rest," when he collapsed in the midst of the sermon. They carried him out, and he never returned to finish his reflection. He died. And so we heard that story, and we sat looking at this beautiful but very dark, very cold church in terms of even temperature. And we asked the guy to tell us about the religious life today in the 21st century. And that's when she shared with us about these percentages that I just shared with you, and about the fact that the church is really struggling. The Christian church, not just the Lutheran church. And then she told us something very interesting. Because we asked her if there was a surgence of, non-denominational churches, as there are in our country. And she said, "Oh, no." Now remember, this was the time, or this was the area that was East Germany. So this is the area that for more than 40 years after the war was under communist or socialist control. When the wall came down and Germany was reunited about 20 years ago, the place was flooded with evangelists from not only Christian denominations, but also from other world religions, thinking that having been under communist control for so long, people would be hungry to hear about the love and saving grace of God. Guess what? According to her, their efforts were completely unsuccessful. That by that point, people had no interest in spiritual matters. The generations had passed. It had not been a focus of people's lives. And now they were interested only in material matters. So, in the seedbed of the Reformation, the place where Martin Luther made God's word so readable and preachable and understandable and even singable, the place where people were assured that they didn't have to earn their salvation, but they were saved by God's grace through faith. In that area, that message is not being heard. And in fact, it's being choked out by apathy and by materialism and, frankly, by concerns over other matters. And as I sat there in that church where Martin Luther had last preached, and I knew that less than 30 people come there for worship on Sunday, this huge cathedral, I thought to myself, That's what's happening in our country. We've got to the point now, they say, where about 50%, less than 50% of the people in our country claim an affiliation with a religious community. Less than 50%. And yet, that proclamation of God's love and grace and mercy has the potential to change lives. That proclamation of Martin Luther, some insignificant priest who had the audacity to believe that what he read in the New Testament was true, is still the true source of our freedom and our hope. And the question is really, do we, like Martin Luther, believe it? Really believe it? Grasp it? Do we really believe that we are set free from slavery to anything else because of Jesus, his love for us, and our faith? Do we really find absolute joy, as Martin Luther did, in the realization that we are the loved and forgiven children of God? And do we allow those realities to shape our lives, to be the basis out of which we make our decisions for how we spend our time and our money and how we use the gifts that God has given us? What are priorities for us, we might say?